that's still kind of where I am right now. So the Mission Podcast has really been one of the first things that I've written now on my clear whiteboard, that along with social justice. And so when I'm pursuing this new this podcast, really this is me just kind of stepping into what this new unknown, uncharted territory is for me. I mean, it's very exciting to know that I don't have to carry with me all of the wrong or negative or bad parts of my upbringing. It's nice to know that that's been washed away, but to know that I'm now responsible for filling in that whiteboard, and it's really up to me. It's pretty scary. So I'm kind of dealing with that while I'm trying to stay afloat and just not completely lose it. It's really hard not to just fold right now, because I really don't know where my true north is. I haven't lost my faith. I haven't lost my interactions. I haven't lost the mystical experiences that I have. They mean so much to me, but really, in terms of like talking about church right now, it's really hard for me. And so that's why, the Mission Podcast has been, it's been a wonderful project, but it's been really confusing for me because I have spent a lot of time talking with people who are religious and who are very still tied to their faith. And I'm not really, to be completely honest, I'm not really tied to my faith because my faith has changed and my views have changed. And so part of the reason I've been feeling so disconnected from myself and from this community lately is I'm losing sight a little bit of what the direction for the Mission Podcast is, because while faith and religion is very important to me, it's also something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. And it's something that oftentimes if people do want to talk about it, they want to talk about it in a negative way. And I'm not there. I'm not in that space. I don't want to do that. It's not productive. In fact, it's kind of too easy. It's too easy to slam on religion right now. And I don't want to do that. So I started the Mission Podcast as a way to sort of help infuse social justice back into the church, into religious conversations. And if I'm going to be real with you folks, I'm finding it kind of difficult because I'm finding that I'm too Christian for a secular audience and I'm not Christian enough for a Christian audience. So my hope of bringing these honest, open conversations to folks are actually, they're kind of missing the mark a little bit, and I'm actually hitting in between my targets. So that brings me to my question in my whole sort of motivation for doing this little segment is I want to figure out who am I talking to, or who am I talking with, excuse me. Who are you folks? Who is the person with the earbuds right now? What are you struggling with? The Mission Podcast is a safe space to bring doubt. But I want to talk about doubt, and I want to talk about our struggles with something else than just the negativity. I want to talk about what you're feeling and how you got there, but I want to talk about how you can overcome it. And I think, for me personally, people who are leaving the church, like me, I haven't left the church, but I want to. Truthfully, I do. I want to, but I stay in because there are here that I love, and they love me. And this in our communities in church, they're all very important, but they can't just be Sunday morning experiences. And so I want the Mission Podcast from my church community here at Mission Hills to be a resource throughout the week to carry with them more than on Sundays. But what does that mean for people who don't like church at all? How can you hear me? My hope is that you would just trust me. If you don't believe in God, or if you don't like church, or even worse, if church has hurt you, church has hurt me too. Church has hurt people every day. But you can't give up. because there are people here that need you. And that's the hardest part about being in a church community, is the sacrifice of yourself. So what does that mean? What does that mean for the Mission Podcast? I want to know who I'm talking to. I want to know who I'm talking with. I want to know what your struggles are. I want to know if you're like me and you have a void in your life that you need filled, and you're looking to fill that with something. I don't want to offend anybody who is stepping into this space thinking you're going to hear a non-religious conversation, nor do I want to offend anybody who steps into the space thinking you're going to hear a religious conversation. You're actually going to hear a little bit of both, because that's who I am right now. I'm a little bit religious and I'm a little bit not. And some days I'm more religious than others, and some days I'm not religious at all. You're getting my most real, authentic emotions as I'm processing them in the moment. If you followed along on the Mission Podcast, you're literally following my process of deconstruction and reconstruction. Is it my goal for this to be a Christian podcast? No, it's not. My goal is for this to be a social justice conversation that incorporates faith, but not as the means to the end. Incorporates faith because so much of compassion and giving back to others comes from faith and comes from religion, not Christianity specifically, but from all religions. All organized religion talks about talks about love. So just to wrap up, I'm doing this podcast for people who feel like they have been cast out of the church, because that's how I feel. I feel like I have been told I don't belong. So this space is for anybody that's been told they don't belong. That's faith-based stuff. That's gender-based stuff. That's sexual orientation-based stuff. It's whatever it is. No one is excluded from this space. So what this means for the Mission Podcast is you're going to hear a mix of faith and you're going to hear a mix of non-faith. And I hope that this makes it a little bit more clear as to why you're going to get a mix of both, because that's really who I am right now. And you're getting the most authentic version of me. So let's continue this journey together. I appreciate you letting me share this about myself. I appreciate you letting me be real and authentic. So let's keep this episode going. This next clip comes from my conversation with Dr. Heather Berg, and in this clip, she is laying down some myths and really giving some great information on how people can advocate for rights for people that are in the adult film industry. Really appreciate all that Heather had to share. Let's jump right in. What are some of the things about porn stars or porn film actors and actresses that are myths that people just assume that are usually just a generalization? Could you share anything in regards to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And before I do, I'll just give one caveat, which is that I think that there's a way that it's sometimes in talking about sex work, sex workers and allies try to bust myths, but do so in a way that continues to
that's a good
pathologize people who do conform to the myths. So as much as sex worker organizing is trying to say, like, hey, we don't all do drugs or have daddy issues, or even to say, hey, some of us do this even though we could make money in other ways. I think that's important, but it's so hard to do that without doubling down on the idea that if someone is using substances, then they're the wrong kind of sex worker, or that the wrong reason to do porn is because you need money. So I do think that that's a tricky thing. But that said, certainly I think the kind of major misconceptions, both from anti-porn people and fans who, want to think of performers, again, not as workers, but, as sex fiends who are there for their amusement. I think the biggest conception is that people take on porn as on the one hand, a last resort, or on the other, because they just love sex that much. And what I found in talking to the overwhelming consensus was that that workers decided to perform in porn because it seemed like a more fun or less tedious way to make a living. And so that is not to discount that some people come into the industry because they really want to explore sexuality, and some of them even think that it's a kind of sexual activism to break down stereotypes in that way. But most people said, I was working in retail and living on $10 an hour in LA really sucks. And other people talked about taking on performance because they didn't want to be saddled with school debt. And it wasn't always about money in the strictest sense. I mean, nobody does any kind of job if they don't need money, but beyond that, people were talking about just how tedious a lot of mainstream work is. And some people even said that they quit. Somebody said they'd quit a job at a coffee shop because her boss there was sexually harassing her. And she decided, if I'm going to deal with men sexualizing me, I might as well make the equivalent of $300 an hour instead of 10. So I think that's the biggest misconception, is this idea of the last resort. And that's something that even well-meaning feminists who are trying to bring support for sex workers sometimes reproduce that idea. They say we should support workers because they have no other options. But the workers I talk to really want to push back against that and say, no, we had options and we made a strategic choice.
I think
that
what
this
you
made
had
more sense.
pointed out is the thing that sort of frustrates me about different Christian or religious organizations that try to infiltrate and work with people in the sex industry, is they try to remind them that they're loved, that God loves them, that their dad loves them, that Jesus loves them, that they're beautiful on the inside, all these other things. And it's like, I know all those things. I get that. And so I would love to I would love to hear your opinion, because I live in the Valley here in Los Angeles. I'm down the road from DG and Vivid, two of the biggest producers of pornography in the world. And, people don't actively protest outside their building, but there are people who believe that pornography should just be eradicated, that the whole industry should just go away, and that will solve our problems with rape, and that will solve our problems with gender issues, and if we just eradicated pornography, everything would be okay. And I would, as someone who has studied and has talked with people about that, I would love for you to just share your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And before we get there, I'll just say, to your point, I'm glad you bring up the kind of history of religious organizations trying to rescue sex workers in various ways. And there is such a long history of this, even from the beginnings of panics over what they called white slavery. And one of the most striking things in that story is that religious organizations have almost always, quote, rescued women sex workers who didn't want to be rescued. And this is still true of organizations who say they now do anti-trafficking work, but the people who are labeled as trafficked are workers who just need better working conditions. But they have in the progressive era and now, the through line is that these organizations often train people to do the very same kind of jobs that they left in order to do sex work. So the history of social workers alongside religious advocates taking in workers, often by force, and training them to do work as maids. And these are the kind of jobs that these very same women, the historical record on this is really rich, said, I went to a gold mining town to sell my wares because I didn't want to clean homes. And so that's just something I think that I would really encourage anyone who is interested in helping to realize that kind of help always causes more harm. That if people want to be helpful, the thing to do is to listen to what workers say they need, and that is labor rights and, in a broader sense, economic rights. If you're really concerned with young women getting into sex work when they'd rather be doing